on the face of it, railing against a system of control, but at the same time wanting to be told what to do. This is a huge danger, and people are very susceptible to it, which is absolutely, which is horrific. But put like that, makes sense.
Yeah,
there's a logic there. So people who do live a life where love and honesty and care and strength and all these things are nurtured, that also gets perpetuated. The idea that to hold a position can be considered dangerous. I mean, that is absolutely psychological torture. Jake.
Welcome to what's become known as the dentist chair. Well, primarily because of Mike, I think. Really, I think he was seeing it in that light more even than Brian. I think
that's casting some aspersions on dentists, as they. But yes.
Yeah. No, I feel you're a slightly different kettle of fish. I think you're slightly more relaxed in this situation.
Let's hope so. I think possibly
not implying you're an egomaniac that loves talking about himself, but
that will emerge if it's the case, I guess. But no, let's hope not. And it's great, but I think the way that this has been set up means that people will have a good idea of what you're doing, because I've got a good view of what you're.
Yeah, because you came to the when I did a little drawing workshop.
I did.
You came, didn't you? So you have but I was going to say you have a slight interest, but it feels to me that you have an interest in pretty much anything.
That's where I've always felt the joys to be taken from life, is in finding out what you can about absolutely everything. Because until you do, you can't possibly know whether or not you're going to enjoy it or be interested in it or understand the pleasure. And I also think if other people do stuff that you haven't really any experience of, there's got to be the first question is, well, why would they do that? They're unlikely to do it if it makes them miserable. and I think something, let's say train spotting. What a great example. To describe somebody as a train spotter, there are connotations. And I think completely unfair connotations. And this might be a stretch, but the age of steam, I totally concede that. I don't think modern trains are much to look at, but the aesthetic quality of a steam engine that's, apart from anything else, stood the test of time and been going for 100+ years. I mean, that is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And in fact, quite near where I live, an old line has been restored, the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Steam Railway, and it's all run by volunteers who've invested huge amounts of time and I think quite considerable amounts of their own money in it. And it's a proper, they really do the splendour of yesteryear justice. And okay, that's by putting on the rose-tinted specs. I'm not trying to say, in the days of steam rail everything was fine.
Of course,
it wasn't. But I can perfectly well see why people would be interested in steam engines, for example, and therefore to write somebody off as a train spotter or a whatever, and also again to sort of deviate slightly, what's just started now in Iran, if it weren't for plane spotters, we would know so much less about what's going on on British bases. So all the intelligence, if one wants to call it that, which I think it is actually, that you can get from particularly East Anglia, Mildenhall, Lakenheath, Fairford in Gloucestershire, Wiltshire, these guys are on it. They go there, they set up, they have absolutely incredible sophisticated camera equipment, and most of all, they know what they're looking at.
Yeah.
And so why would you not take an interest in what they're doing? I'm not necessarily going to join them, but to have a peripheral interest in that and an awareness of what it is that it's all about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how I suppose the other way I think about it is how terribly dull life would be if we were all interested in just the same stuff.
Yeah.
And there wasn't, we all did the same stuff. That would be very boring. And yet that's in a way where we're supposedly being pushed into a narrower and narrower space where we are only meant to live one version of life. And that would be, I think that would be very sad. So I think to always try and have an awareness of other things, which may not necessarily become one's passion in life, but they are all interesting. Everything. There's always something. There's always something there to find. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a good point that we never really understand how important the other can be. So there's we have our way of navigating the world, and we think we have our priorities, but like the example of the plane spotter, someone might be doing something completely random over here that you think is unimportant, and yet it plays into this big picture aspect.
Absolutely.
How different do you think people are? It's one of the things that I was thinking about the other day. It keeps coming up. In a similar way that we've just talked about, we have our sort of perspective on the world, and there's a tendency, I think, isn't there, for humans to think that everyone else is like them, in a way, because we only have our own experience. Yeah. So we, by nature, I think we kind of transfer that onto what we see out there, and maybe shift it a little bit. But sometimes because you've travelled a lot,
yeah,
and I think that changes your perspective.
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
How fundamentally different do you think people are? And then how fundamentally different do you think the elite class, or let's call it the elite class, or the ruling subset?
All right. Well, it's a good job we got 4 hours. I think that there are quite a large number of broadly different types of people, but I think that wherever you go in the world, you will find that society is by and large comprised of the same percentages of a type of person.
Okay.
And I think that, like many comparable ways of describing differences, we probably want to consider a triangle pyramid shape with fewer people at, when I say the top, it's perhaps a bit misleading, but what I really mean is that I think the vast majority of people probably do consider that the majority of people are like them, and they are right, because that is, I think, the way that society works. And I think that we can provide pretty considerable evidence that that's the case, because
in terms of drives and desires,
well, I think
needs,
yes, all of that, but I think also the resignation that they're not really in control of their own life or destiny. That I was listening this morning to the first episode of your 1,000 Words with Brian, and in it you discuss the apparent paradox of people on the face of it railing against a system of control by saying, this is not good. I feel oppressed, but at the same time wanting to be told what to do. So still wanting to be under a yoke of some sort, and not thinking, okay, in actual fact, I think the best thing might be for me to make my own decisions about my life and be realistic about which bits I can and can't control. But the ones that I can't necessarily control, I can either work around or I can certainly ignore to a greater degree. And then I think as the triangle, the pyramid tapers towards the top, and again, I'm simply using it as an idea of a shape, not necessarily suggesting that the top of it is actually it's not to do with sort of elite or control or whatever. But there are fewer people who are confident in their own ability to manage their own lives, and also who are confident to hold views and to conduct themselves in such a way that they don't really mind what other people's response to that is.
I think that is absolutely fundamental.
Yeah,
I really do, and I think it's so. Let's if we talk about the movement, because it's a vague way of putting it, but this movement towards truth, or this movement of people, however you want to put it, they just go over exactly what you said there. Just this idea that there's confidence, isn't it? There's confidence in in yourself almost.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the two ways I would put it, but they're obviously totally intertwined. One is to actually manage your own life, to control your own destiny.
Yeah.
But the other thing is to have the confidence psychologically, mentally, to not care if that does not accord with other people's worldview or the way in which they want to necessarily live their life. But you see, those things don't have to be in conflict. Doesn't mean that you have to be in conflict with somebody who doesn't necessarily think like you. And I think, again, this is something that people don't really consider, and this is where it's so dangerous. Increasingly now, through particularly mainstream media, by which I mean the whole lot. I'm not talking about sort of news, but I'm just talking about the whole sort of pantheon of cultural inputs. We are being told that if somebody disagrees with you, then there is something wrong with that person, and they are in some way they're against you.
Enemy.
Rather than being different, they're just they're actually against you, and this is a huge danger, and people are very susceptible to it.
Last year, I won the Sussex Portrait Artist of the Year competition. It's a timed event where you have 4 hours to complete a portrait, and this year I'll be taking part in a larger national competition. And I've been practicing timed portraits from photographs sent by friends, mainly from the Hope Sussex community. These portraits will be on display at the Hope Sussex Music Festival in August, so get your tickets, come along and support a brilliant homeschooling project. As a result of this, I've decided to offer what I'm calling day portraits alongside my standard portrait commission. Normally I spend a week or two on a portrait, making sure the likeness is 100% accurate and offering revisions and complex backgrounds. My day portraits are simpler and cost only £350, a fraction of the cost of a full commission, and so far the response has been 100% positive. So, if you're looking for something unique to either gift or have in your home, go to my website jakefern.co.uk and add it to your basket. I'm sure that you'll love what you receive.
But you see, the problem is going back to the idea that the vast majority of society is contained within a space where they aren't routinely challenging what is being presented to them. Of course, if that's presented and you think, well, everybody else is like you, then that creates horrific tension, division, friction, conflict, all of that stuff internally, which manifests externally.
Yeah.
So there is this great sense of unease, which again can be used as a lever to divide wherever you want, especially if there's the suggestion, that there is a sort of an upper tier, that there are people in society who are sort of more important, more worthy, which is absolute rubbish. We're all born the same. It's total rubbish. And yet people will allow themselves to believe it. And I think, I don't want to jump ahead, but having spent some time within what we might describe as the establishment, within some of the structures that people look at, I think in terms of great skepticism, or actually to a large extent, people don't really understand. But having rubbed shoulders with a lot of these people, they're just people.
Of course, yeah.
But
it goes without saying, but it does need saying.
Yeah, it does need saying. I think it absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I remember a very early example of realising this to be the case and just thinking, wow, that is quite special. I was once on a visit, these were the days when the army had enough money to be able to send people who were considering joining the army away on regimental visits to places that weren't very well, the wettest parts of Wales, let's say.
Right.
And I just spent a couple of weeks in Jamaica, and I was waiting at the airport, having had a rather exciting journey to the airport. I was in the back of a 4-ton lorry. It was really incongruous. We'd cleared up from a party the night before. It was some regimental bash, and I was in the back of a 4-tonner, which in this country, of course, would absolutely not be permitted at all. It's a it's a freight, it's a cargo vehicle.
Right. Okay.
There's a whole load of really heavy kitchen equipment standing around the place, and I was in my I was in a jacket and tie, sitting in the back of this thing. Anyway, we were driving along Coast Road, and suddenly the next thing I knew, there was a kind of we just dropped like that on one side, and all this kit shot across the floor of the thing. Wow, that was something. I wonder what's happening. And the sea seemed to be getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer. I could just see out the back through the canvas. Anyway, it turned out the front wheel had come off, and we'd landed on the fuel tank, and we'd skidded for about, I don't know, 200 yards across the thing. Anyway, all was well. But this was at a time when you could go out and sort of do things differently. Health and safety didn't really mean so much. But I can remember being in Kingston Airport and watching the people who get off. It's quite small, so you see the people get off the airplane that you're about to get on, and they walk into the terminal building, and there's a kind of dogleg thing, and they walk towards you, and there's a great big glass screen with a whole load of arrows on it pointing people. So they walk towards it, and then they would turn left to their left to carry on into the arrivals bid. And I was watching these people, and just in the way that you do, I was just scanning the faces, just thinking. And I thought, oh, hang on, I recognise that face, and it was Michael Howard, who was the then leader of the opposition, leader of the Conservative Party. And this was an international flight, so I don't know, 200 odd people on board, and one person tried to push that piece of glass that everybody else had worked there. It was Michael Howard. He walked straight into it. And it wasn't that he was, because he was leader of the opposition, he was first off the aircraft, poor chap. No, he didn't see anyone else. No, he was in the middle of a throng of people, and he pushed. So that was an early insight into, I suppose, I don't know, the human condition. I mean, you just
it's kind of cliche almost.
Bumbling, yes, absolutely.
Someone who has everything done for them can't even navigate.
Yes,
that
is a very good point. And but anyway, I mean, I don't need to single out poor old Michael Howard, but yes, the idea that we should attribute some sort of what do you say? Some quality, perhaps, to a particular person according to the status that they have, because they do hold such and such a position. That means that somehow they have different, I don't know what, different cognitive abilities, or that's just not. It's really not the case. And again, talking about, you just referred to sort of elites or this, that, and the other. The other thing that one has to consider, and again, we go back to the human condition and nature and nurture, but for a huge number of people, this is generational. Look at Donald Trump's family is a very good example. Look at how his family have been dragged into positions that I think it would be reasonable to assume they never ever would have attained in life had they not been connected to him, and the same would be said of him. So the idea that people achieve these positions that we talk about in life entirely on their own merits in the span of their own life is that's pretty rare. That is pretty rare, and therefore, you just have to think, right, well, they're ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. And I don't mean extraordinary in a positive sense. I just mean extraordinary as in outside of the ordinary. Yeah. But and so therefore, I think it's incumbent upon people, especially who are listening to this, because I think if anyone's listening to this, then they're less likely to be in the larger group of society who, I think, put very simplistically, do consider that the majority of people are like them. I think to be tuning into a podcast of this ilk, you've realised that something is different, but then you're faced with the binary of, in terms of what you do about it. Is it you that's going to do something about it, or is it somebody else that's going to do something about it? So I wouldn't say that you just because you're listening to this necessarily puts you outside of that group, but it certainly means you're probably thinking of something different.
Well, it means you at least asking some of the right questions.
Yeah. Which is, well, I mean, the first and biggest step, really.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there. We could talk about the nature of those kind of people, the people who find themselves in that position. I mean, we talked a little bit with Mike about it, but the trauma, intergenerational trauma. Now, you get on dodgy ground when you can sound potentially like you're making excuses for people who are doing terrible things.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a simple fact of life that abused people abuse people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a truth. So these people who are in positions, that's not to. There's a difference. People get nervous when it sounds like you're making an excuse for something. It's about understanding, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's just simply objectively understanding why things are happening. So, you know, I haven't had a lot of contact with people in those circles, but I have had one or two, and you know, I've heard stories of people who are, you know, all their friends were raped basically as children who progressed to the next level of some Etonian college, or I think he was a choir boy, and he didn't get picked. All of the children that got picked through to the next level from 11, 12 onwards were buggered, you know, and raped. And then from another friend, we hear that the mothers of children who aren't raped are concerned. And we'll call it rape rather than, you know, molested or abused, you know, because it often is just rape. They're worried because it means their children aren't going to progress. You know, this is what I've heard from.
Right.
So, you know, someone like Charles, what kind of childhood did he have? What you know, what kind of suffering did he go through? What lack of love and affection, and then we talked about this with Brian a little bit. It occurred to me while we were talking that there's this loop. We were talking about Epstein and this hold that they have over certain people because they've been involved with child abuse. Well, what attracts someone to be involved in child abuse? Well, it's usually those who have been abused as children. So there's this perfect setup almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll abuse them as children, so they therefore abuse children, and therefore we can blackmail them. I mean, it's sort of, wow, that's neat.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Which is absolutely, which is horrific, but put like that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a logic there.
Well, it begs the question: has that situation evolved naturally, or by some kind of design? Is there an external? This is where we start.
Yeah. Well, no,
external.
We're getting into old.
What is evil? What is, you know?
Yeah, this is where Yuval Noah Harari comes into his own, as it were. It depends. It depends where you're going to draw the line with regard to the definition of natural, because he posits that well, if someone thought of it and was able to do it, then it's natural. And yes, okay, I can follow the rationale, I can follow the logic there. But this, yes, I mean, this is absolutely enormous, because how do we know? How do we know what has gone before? If we, you know, what sort of view are we taking of the path that mankind has taken?
Yeah.
How far back do we go to be able to look at man and see that he wasn't doing that people weren't insecure, that there were that the herd or whatever the grouping would have been described as functioned again, naturally, I don't know. Do we say naturally?
It's a hard word to define, isn't
it?
It
is. No, it is.
Because in a way, I would agree that literally everything is natural. I mean, you could take the most artificial construction, plastic, processed food. It's natural because it's part of the whole. It's part of creation,
and it was created, exactly.
It's a question of how much manipulation there has been.
Yeah,
I mean, what is the motivation of that manipulation?
Yeah, so do we need to redefine terms? I mean, actually, interestingly, this was part of a conversation I was having over the weekend, and I don't know quite when this is going to go out, but we've just come off the back of Easter weekend, which was, I think, for most of the country, a huge great surprise, because bank holidays are supposed to be wet, and yesterday was bone dry and absolutely delightful. But also, obviously, always a great time to talk, and there's always a lot of conjecture about the relationship between humans and animals, and whether we should score ourselves against the way in which animals behave, and whether we consider that we were once, or we are animals, or you can go around in circles with all this stuff. But the simple fact is that if a squirrel wants to start corrupting other squirrels by selling them drugs and whatnot, it can't, at least as far as we're aware, and so therefore we have this idea that we have come unstuck, that we are corrupted, that we are sort of fallen, and I'm not really sure how you ever bottom that argument out exactly, mostly because, as I say, we can't go back to a period in time where, despite the best efforts of many museums around the country to create what we looked like, 20,000 years ago, whatever, we don't know, but I think therefore, if we're talking sort of perhaps broader principles, one of the things when I referred to corruption, I think the thing that underpins all of this, or at least is a thread that we can deal with, is dishonesty, and that, I think, is sort of where we are when we consider whether or not something's natural. So talking about ultra processed food, that's a really good example. It is dishonest to call that food. It might be natural that we can grow something, then process it, then put it in a packet, and then say eat it, but it's dishonest to call it food, because it doesn't actually do, in the way that we define food, it doesn't do what it is supposed to do. It doesn't provide you with the nutrition and, critically, the sort of health-giving properties that it's supposed to. So that's a lie. And I think we've, again, how on earth to be objective about this, because of course the more you look, the more you find, but it looks like, we've started talking about steam trains and whatnot, it looks like the society we live in now is just a more deceitful one than the age of steam. How on earth do I know? I mean, I wasn't there either, so I don't know. And actually, when you evaluate, let's say, the sort of crime literature during the age of steam, actually it was going great guns. So, I mean, presumably people were still very deceitful and whatnot. Maybe we've just found different ways to do it. So I'm not sure we ever really get to the bottom of that, but I do think that that honesty and sincerity are ways in which you can draw a pretty, a sort of definitive divide, as it were.
Yeah.
So therefore,
maybe it's just more useful to maybe we can put the natural only
because
to the side, because
because we just chase it all day and we don't really know.
But in terms of honesty,
because that, I mean, the natural argument is one of the things that humans will say, oh well, homosexuality is not natural because animals don't do it, but actually they do.
They do, yeah.
And so there could be any number of natural reasons for it. The idea that the animal kingdom regulates its own populations in times of scarcity or abundance. I mean, that is very, very obvious to see that happen. You can see that even on on an annual or seasonal basis. So and indeed plants as well, they do exactly the same thing. So again,
they're just
is this
picky about what hole they choose to use?
Yeah,
I mean, on a very practical level.
Yeah.
As a whole.
Yeah.
I'll try sticking it in. I'm not bothered about.
Yeah. But you see,
but
then going back to the natural thing, we don't know. Because we have absolutely lost touch with all of our senses. What we don't know is whether the proportion of society that in terms of reproduction, whether we are in fact self-limiting or not. And this goes back to all sorts of things concerning the agricultural revolution and what it is. What is our purpose? Are we just here to procreate?
Mm-hmm.
Are we here to increase the size of our population? Are we here to dominate other populations of other species? There are many questions which presumably we're not going to manage to answer in
we'll sort them all out
in today's session.
We'll sort them all out.
Yeah, well, we'll have a go. But the point is, sorry, I know this seems like a deviation, but it is.
The whole 4 hours will be a deviation.
Yeah, well, let's hope. But this is because I think it does relate very much to what you're talking about with, for example, child abuse as a mechanism for perpetuating a control system.
Yeah.
And by and large, it's effectively, I don't mean to belittle it by saying, but it's a dishonesty. It is not being upfront about why you want to control people. So therefore you have to use tactics by which that doesn't really come up. You're not having to sit somebody down and explain to them why it is that you want them to do such thing. You're just putting them in a position where they have to do it, or you're making it extremely likely that they will by permitting them to undergo that sort of abuse, which, as you quite rightly point out, it is known that has a very high likelihood of recurring in the victim.
Yeah.
So, but you see, a lot of what we're probably going to talk about might seem to be very negative. That is very negative. But all of this has there's the other side to the coin, which is that this works the other way. So people who do live a life where love and honesty and care and strength and all these things are nurtured, that also gets perpetuated through generations.
Yes, I think it does.
Otherwise we wouldn't be here now. We wouldn't
totally
be having these sorts of discussions. And I think it's very easy to forget or very easy to lose sight of that. And also the other thing I think is that if we're talking about individuals who are, going back to the sort of earlier stages of the conversation, talking about individuals who are happy to crack on, find their own path, and not to care what others think, in a totally non-conflict sense. So I will just do my own thing. I'm not going to tread on your toes if you disapprove or whatever. Doesn't matter. It would be great if everybody was happy. I think that those sorts of people are not going to be inclined to jump up and down and saying, right, everybody's got to do this thing, everybody's got to do that. Whereas the unfortunate thing is that people who are more inclined to be involved in child abuse and whatever want to bend the world or humanity to their will, and that is the inherent problem that I think we can never get away from.
I think the more internal pain you're feeling, the more you need to control the external world.
Yes.
So the more broken and chaotic you are, the more unaligned with truth you are. You have to perpetually try and control. You have to control because it's not true, because it's a lie.
Yeah, that's it.
Whereas when you live in authenticity, you don't have to control anything.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Because and I think that's it. And you do see that with people. You see people having to construct a narrative that makes sense to them in order that they can sort of understand and believe in the reality that they're living through, which of course we all have to do. We absolutely do.
We do, but the extent to which we attach to it is probably the key aspect of that, because we all have a model that we use to navigate as a map to move through the world. But if you're not prepared to just change maps as the observations change, then you're screwed. And it just occurring to me when you were talking about the idea of natural and unnatural, and these questions which are, we just showed how difficult that is to answer, and rather than accept that difficulty and that sit in that space of I don't know, we see people jumping into myth and belief. So we have creation stories that kind of fill that void. And for example, now you have dogmatic Christians who would argue that everything, their definition of natural and unnatural would be, well, it says here.
Yes, quite. Yeah.
I mean, I'm picking on dogmatic Christians, but there's
a
multitude like different kind of faiths who do the same thing.
But that is such a good example. The it says here, because I was thinking about that on my drive down this morning, and again it goes back to this position of dishonesty. So the rules and regulations by which a society, particularly a civilized society, which we're constantly told we live in, these rules and regulations very seldom say what they actually mean. And so if you take that down to a really, really sort of stupid, low level, no, you go onto a bus or something, no chewing gum. You can't have chewing. I mean, would never chew chewing gum. Beside the point. What they actually mean is we don't want chewing gum left on the bus or stuck to the seat. But they don't say that. So the rule is no chewing gum. In the same way that you have zones now run by local authorities where there's no alcohol. But they don't actually mean no alcohol. They mean no drunken, debauched, violent behaviour.
Yeah.
But they're not going to say that. And so there are two effects there. One is the very obvious one, which is that it's dishonest. You're being presented with a case that actually has no real basis, or an argument or a prohibition or whatever it is. So that is part of it. And I think the other thing in doing that is to create these blanket conditions, and to imagine, if you look at it the other way around, it's as though if you're sort of getting onto a bus and you're told no chewing gum, it's this assumption of bad faith, as though everybody in some way is up to something, like the airport security thing.
Yeah.
We're told that such and such a thing happened on an airplane, so now everybody's a suspect. Yeah. Everybody has to reveal this, that, and the other. I mean, that's a terrible way. I know these sound like sort of rather frivolous examples, but they're not, because they do actually speak volumes about the way in which society is sort of held in check. And unfortunately, it tells us a lot about how people just accept it.
Well, not only do they accept it, I think they actually want it.
Yes.
Because if you talk to people, they need authority because they haven't. Now we're getting back to that question of sovereignty, essentially.
Yeah.
They haven't learned to trust themselves.
Yes.
So how on earth can they trust anyone else?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's this parent-child relationship that people have with government, that they accept the role of a child, and they think everyone else needs to be governed like a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we haven't nurtured wisdom, common sense, all these things. Yeah. So essentially, you have got this chaos which they think needs. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's a horse before the cart thing. It's a perpetual cycle of they treat us like children, Therefore, we don't have the skills to act like mature
Yeah.
adults. Therefore, we need governing like children, and it just goes round and round. And that's what I think that's why I think the truth movement, whatever it is, it's absolutely the most essential thing. Is not necessarily to know every detail of what money's been sent here or this that. It's the first most important thing is to learn to accept your sovereignty and to learn to be sovereign.
Yeah.
And whatever comes from that.
Yes, absolutely, and I think the first part of that is being sovereign of mind.
100%.
Because I think I think there is, from what I see, I think an awful lot of people put themselves off before they've actually given any of that a chance. In that, the obvious example is what happened in 2020 when I think there would have been only a very, very small number of people in the United Kingdom, at least, who didn't in some way have some aspects of their life affected when the government says, right, everything's got to stop. And it wasn't because the government said it, it was because everybody did it.
Of course.
And in fact, of course, if we think back, an awful lot of organisations in particular had already done it before the government even told them to jump. A lot of businesses had already sent people home to work from home, whatever that was really supposed to mean, and this, that, and the other. And so I think that was such an awful shock for so many people, and it was such it was physical is not quite the right word, but you were prevented from doing certain things that you wanted to simply because those things weren't even happening. You couldn't do it. So, but the thing is that I think because of that, a lot of people considered and do consider and will have done in years prior that therefore you can't even be in a sovereign state of mind because you're constrained perhaps in what you can and can't do. But I don't see it like that at all. I think you can absolutely be sovereign of mind even if you haven't been able to affect the changes that you want to. And again, even if you start to make those changes but you haven't achieved everything that you're setting out to, well, it's a process. You can't possibly hope to just transform everything like that, and just because it doesn't happen like that is absolutely not a failure. So I think people need to be much more I suppose positive in the face of adversity, but also more realistic and more willing to consider what they have achieved, and even just holding that position in your mind, because for an awful lot of people that is a very, very difficult thing to do, especially in the weight of considerable apparent public opinion that your point of view is wrong. And this is where I do think that the situation is deteriorating, because the idea that to hold a position can be considered dangerous, I mean, that is that is really, really appalling. Ultimate. That is absolutely psychological torture. And yet people are blindly going along with it and entering into it.
Particularly young people who've grown up with that being accepted as normal over the last 10, 15 years.
So no, I mean, the way I think I do consider all of this is that the antidote is to always remain positive, remain optimistic, and just carry on doing what you want to do. Carry on thinking what you want to think. And no one, really no one can take that away from you, I think.
Do you ever struggle yourself with, because being you sort of public figure and you're out there, and if some people you can have a positive attitude, and and then maybe you can go and hide away for 6 months. But if you're in the public eye, you've got a position, you've got a sort of commitment and a responsibility to the UK column. And I will ask you in a minute just about the UK column. Do you ever feel, oh God, I just want to go away for 6 months and live in the jungle and get away from it? Or do you feel,
No, I mean, well, any temptation to go and live in a jungle for 6 months is not necessarily the product of the first bit of the question.
Yeah.
As in, I mean, I'd love to go and live in a jungle for 6 months. It would be completely fascinating. But if I did do that, I would definitely come back and talk about it and make a positive outcome from it. But no, I mean, I'm pleased to say that I don't feel like that. I think I have. I think even in the sort of short period of time that I've been involved in this, I probably had periods of time where I've been surprised, perhaps, by the response of certain people to certain events, or the perhaps UK column coverage of events and whatnot. But I think that comes from a position of an incorrect assumption, which is that, and to be fair, I do remember this, but
are you referring to
what I'm referring to is the idea that what we're just talking about, having this positive frame of mind of being sovereign in your own being and your own mind, and that therefore that is universally and unmitigatedly a positive. And so therefore, really, what have you got to worry about in really simple terms? And thinking that anybody who has, you're talking about a movement, but anybody who's broadly speaking, seeing the world like we're seeing, to think that, okay, therefore people are thinking positively and that they are not susceptible to this, that, and the other. But of course, that is unrealistic. It turns out not to be the case. Again, I mean, I should be very clear. If that does happen and there's a reaction against something, I absolutely don't take that as being a disaster at all. And in fact, and I'm delighted to say that. Well, first of all, the great joy of UK Column being a membership organisation and having a really close sort of connection with our members and viewers and whatnot means that you do actually have this level of personal contact that I don't think any other organisation will ever come close to, which is pretty phenomenal. But also it does mean that and sometimes it does happen, because let's face it, although I'm putting a positive spin on things, I absolutely acknowledge people have terrible life situations, and that it is a real mental battle to retain your sanity and to think that you are, sort of, let's say, sovereign and all these kinds of things. So I do not belittle any of what might come in or any reaction against things. But what I do think is positive is that I think in every instance where I've had sort of direct communication with anybody that's presented let's say, a view that they're not entirely happy with the way in which we have dealt with something, or maybe something I've said personally or whatever, I think we've parted friends every single time. So it's just been the beginning of a dialogue in which, there's sort of, well, look, if that was not clear, what I really mean is this, and blah blah blah, and it's absolutely always worth the investment of time because there's always a good outcome. I honestly, I can't think of a single person who has sort of gone away thinking, that that's that. I'm
screw you.
Yeah. But and I mean, I sort of say that as though that's gosh, how great. But that's as it should be. Yeah, we really should not be falling out with each other all the time, regardless of which sort of side of any fence you might consider that you're on. I mean, this is the thing. I think I don't really consider that there are all these barriers that we're told are there, because I think they are to a certain extent, but really only to a certain extent. And in actual fact, we can often find that we have much more in common.
Oh yeah.
With people than either party would perhaps allow themselves to believe.
Yeah,
and
so we're talking more here about division within a sort of a group of people who should.
But what? Yes, no, sorry, I'm. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Sympathetic.
Yes, but then again, I am coming back to your jungle thing with the. Well, I think I don't know. Were you about to ask about how you're regarded by other people who don't necessarily share your point of view?
No, it was more just the asking you. Do you ever feel like just the psychological pressure, not necessarily of people dumping their stuff on you, but just the weight of what we're dealing with? Do you know?
No.
And having to dive into it, because there's a difference between being aware of stuff, and having to explore. And in your role, UK column role, is to go deeper and deeper. Yeah. And sometimes I can only speak for myself. I don't want to.
Right.
Like.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not because I'm. I'm afraid to. It's just like, okay, I want to put my energy somewhere else.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Whereas when you've got a role, it's harder to do that. I mean, a silly example. I think I listen to the DJs in the morning sometimes because my son listens to Heart FM. I think every morning they have to be so jolly and cheery and spout this inane drivel.
Yeah.
I know they're getting paid well.
Yeah.
But I would struggle. Yeah. Or even musicians who have to go out and perform with emotion every night.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I like performing, but I do it, 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
So that's kind of what
I mean, I guess, Heart FM's dodged a bullet there, haven't they? If I'm not having to,
not to liken you to it.
No. But no, I think I take your point, but then again, I also think that's why I am here and not on Heart FM. Yeah. I mean, I have to admit I haven't spent that much time thinking about Heart FM, but anyway, yes, no. For me, it overlaps. I don't think I have any moments of thinking that it's all too big or too scary. I don't think I've thought about anything. And because if you do, then what's the point? I mean, it's a ridiculous position to put yourself in. So
that's a military man speaking.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe, but we'll come to that. We'll come to that. I can explain that.
Yeah.
But yes. Well, first of all, what we do, and actually, I think this is a good one. I like this Heart FM thing.
Good.
Because Heart FM, if he or she is looking out of their studio window in the morning and there's someone's bins blown over, there's just rubbish all over the street, it's pouring with rains, just someone's had a crash or whatever. It's all how do you turn that into a morning everybody?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It's quite difficult. Whereas what we're doing now, and have been, I mean, crikey, I've only just turned up, but what Brian and Mike have been doing for 20 years is building a story upon the building blocks that they started with, what Brian very first started looking into. And therefore it is a different thing, because the Heart FM bloke is not going to say, oh gosh, that bin yesterday, when I was talking about that bin yesterday, it was standing up and it looked so happy and it was wonderful. Chances are they probably didn't mention it. And so that they don't start from that same place. Whereas I think what we're doing now is building and drawing a lot of things together that other people can't necessarily see the connections between. Does that mean that the viewer or the listener or the member or the intermittent sort of part of the UK column audience has to pay absolutely rigid attention to every single detail? No, absolutely not. And does it mean that if you are researching such and such a thing for a news programme, that you need to be able to dig into every single bit of background detail? No, probably not. But, and again, I think as personalities, we will all deal with it slightly differently. But I find that, in fact, when you ask your brain to do something, by and large, it's quite. I was going to use the word compliant, but that's probably the wrong one. It responds, and I think immediately when looking at a particular news story, you do, and this is where I really take issue with people who think artificial intelligence is the future, because you bring to mind so many things that might be directly related, could be a tangent, could be just a sense of, so, whatever it is. And I think that we, as humans, we will always have we will absolutely always have the edge on that. But no, I mean, I think where we thrive, or maybe I should just say in terms of what we're doing and what we deliver is in fact the sense of excitement at seeing it for what it is, and being able to say, by the way, the government or this organisation or whatever is dressing up something as this, when in actual fact it's that, and that's not depressing. That's exciting is the wrong word, but it's useful to be able to do, because to be caught out later on, to be blindsided, to not realise is a massive handicap in life.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I look at it. I think, the last sort of job I had, as it were, was working for the police for what was actually only a short period of time. But I was working as a detective, and a lot of what I am doing now is actually quite similar.
Yeah.
But really much more fun. So no, in no way do I find it. The reason for mentioning that is obviously a lot of what one's dealing with as a detective can be extremely depressing.
Yeah.
But then again, it's just how you frame that in your own mind. Are you going to be weighed down by what is essentially very depressing, or are you going to think, right, well, the whole point of me looking at this is to be able to do something about it?
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same with the UK column. The only reason we're looking at this is in order that people can do something about it.
Yeah.
Forewarned is forearmed. And in fact, I think it might be this week, I've recently interviewed a lady who has been a UK column member for some time. And this is absolute perfect demonstration of what I mean. I mean, I absolutely concede I do bang on. I bang on a lot about agriculture, use of land, food, going back to your ultra processed things, basically about the absolute corruption of the whole sort of land and environmental movement, and how the result is just fast profits for everybody that shouldn't be involved even in the first place. Terrible diet, death and destruction, and all those kinds of things. But obviously, if you get a grip and you're able to do your own thing, you can have a great life and eat well, be healthy, and whatnot. Anyway, a lady member got in touch after listening to me banging on about this and said, oh, well, back in 2021, we, group of us up in Derbyshire, joined together and bought land and entered into exactly that thing. And what a great story.
Yeah.
But you see, if we sit there like puddings and we don't put this stuff out, then we don't create that sense of there being an iterative sort of snowballing process. And that is absolutely the way I see it.
Mm-hmm.
We do the research, we do the analysis, we put the stories out. It's entirely up to the audience as to how they receive that information. But we are very cautious, as Brian always says. We want to give a measured, rational view. We're not ever going to try to panic or scaremonger people. What is the point? Everybody else is trying to do that. So we are acting as a sort of counter to that.
Yeah.
But the way I see it is that we deal with these topics, we present the information, people react, and they do what it is they do, and we will get feedback. And sometimes that will be, I tried this, it worked. I tried this, it didn't work. I told so-and-so that, and then that comes back into us, and it continues to feed. So I see that, despite the fact that, as you say, some of the subject matter can be, you can consider it at face value, of course, to be negative. I see the whole process as being extremely positive.
Yeah.
And so the idea, because the reason this comes up a lot is because, of course, a lot of people, you've got the sort of people who are trapped in the BBC sphere, whatever, and then a huge void in the middle where people have just stepped away from news altogether because they just don't want to engage in it. Yeah. Now, that's fine. I'm not necessarily going to criticise them because I totally understand where that comes from. But I feel that we are, if we say it's a spectrum, we are at the other end of the spectrum where we're doing something that's overwhelmingly positive. I can entirely see why people might not look at it like that. But this goes back to my suggestion that we are, as a society, broadly a sort of a triangular or pyramid shape where the majority of people are not going to be doing not going to be making those progressive or positive steps. And so, yeah, it's a trap. But again, a lot of those people will fall into the, well, just no news. And my message is always, well, okay, fine, but then you're not really putting yourself in a position where you can change your circumstances. If you're just going to be gloomy about it and not do anything for yourself, then our ability to help you is really limited.
Sure.
And if it's not too unkind to say, then my sympathy also is a little bit diminished.
Sure.
Because you want, people, that will go back to the whole authority figure. Is it that you want somebody else to sort it out, or is it that you want to take ownership and have the satisfaction of sorting it out yourself? What's your choice? And I know which mine is.
Yeah.
And not and you take everything that comes with that. If you cock it up, it's your fault too. And that is a really important part of it, because the other thing of the sort of the white hat savior piece is that if it goes wrong, it's
Yeah.
And I followed so and so, and then it's just all gone wrong.
Yeah.
All right, and again, so somehow it's not your fault, and that is to my mind that's just crazy. That is not the way to live life. But yeah, we okay. Anyway, we'll come back to animals, but yeah. So no, I don't feel negative about stuff. I don't feel gloomy about stuff. And in actual fact, with regard to, as you say, sort of, being in the public eye, in actual fact, it actually makes life an awful lot easier, personally, because I do this for a living now. So I don't have to sort of hide, as it were. Well, you don't have to be in that. Do you know what I mean? I don't have to be in that position where. Well, okay, going back to my background, both personal and professional, I suppose, where my views might not necessarily chime with everybody that I've rubbed alongside over the years, and there was a period of, I would say, some never overt actually, but some slight awkwardness when it was quite clear that. The suggestion that the government are all sort of psychopathic, congenital liars, was perhaps a little bit too much. But then if you're doing that if that's part of what you're doing,
it's on the table
for a living, then it's fine, and it doesn't. And then on the other side of that, the other terrific thing, and this is where I really am delighted to be doing what I'm doing, is being able to measure the effect. And this is something that that businesses should talk about all the time, but probably don't. There's no point in doing anything unless you can measure the effect. If you're going to make a business, you've got to be able to understand, well, what is that actually doing? What is that delivering, apart from making us feel like we're doing this and that? You've got to be able to measure it.
Yeah.
And I am able to do that in some small way because what I do is public, and because I do put stuff out there onto platforms that I know people see. I'm constantly amazed by going to events or gatherings from sort of various past lives and meeting people that I haven't seen for decades, and absolutely immediately people will say, really, really love what you're doing with UK Collar.
Right.
I just think, wow, I did not have you down as and this is the problem. This is part of the trap, because we live in an age where we're told that if so-and-so says that, well, perhaps we should just think a little bit more about the, what we're being told about climate change. Even to think about that is professional suicide, or indeed personal excommunication from all the networks that you might have been part of. So you never hear about this stuff because people do not, publicly declare that that's what they might think. And yet when they see that somebody else is doing so, of course they want to talk about it. And so this, this stuff does work. And that is, that is really positive, and I'm not just slapping myself on the back saying, you know, oh, great personal decision. What I mean is that the UK column mission to be a sort of straight down the line news organisation really does work, and I do credit Brian's vision in particular. When he started out, he could absolutely see what needed to be done in all, and it worked. Okay, you're still always going to have a large number of people who will just not engage, but you know, I mean, crikey, it would be silly of us to take that personally, or take it as an insult, or take it as a failing. That is well beyond our control, I'm afraid, at the moment. I mean, but no, there's a gathering momentum, there's a gathering effect. I mean, I've seen that in the time that I've been around. So yeah, it's terrific. However, when you go out in the streets and you actually watch police in action, it's almost as though they've had the picture, you know, back to front. Yeah, division and vitriol. Yes, I mean, it doesn't belong in any debate ever. When he was taking seriously the suggestion that Edward Heath and others were involved in all sorts of things that they shouldn't have been. That is very, very controversial, but I can substantiate exactly why it is I do think that.